Normally when you embark on a cruise, you'll have to fill out lots of paperwork, you'll go through security, you'll have to drop off your bags, and it can take an hour or two. On my last cruise though, the check-in took at most 15 seconds. We scanned a QR code, a paper ticket was printed, and we walked straight onto the ship. We were boarding the Silja Symphony, which is a ferry that holds 2,800 passengers. Over 3 million guests cruise on these ferries every year, and although I've been cruising on cruise ships since I was a child, I have always avoided ferries. My experiences with ferries in the past have not been good. I get seasick, I find them quite boring, and I've always thought that ferries were something that you endured if you had to, but definitely not something that you enjoyed. That was until I started seeing pictures like this, and I could not believe that this was a ferry. I managed to find tickets for around €22 per person per night, so I decided that this was the time I should give it a try. The cruise that I booked went from Stockholm in Sweden to Helsinki in Finland and then back again. I didn't know how I would get on this cruise speaking only English, but there was only one way to find out, and that was to take the cruise. When I originally booked this cruise, I made a massive mistake, and instead of booking the cruise from Stockholm to Helsinki and back, I booked the cruise in the reverse direction. I'd already booked my flights, I'd already booked my hotel, so I couldn't really change it, but thankfully I sent an email to Tallink, which are the company that run the Silja ferries, and they said, sure, that is no problem, we will just reverse it to you and reissue a ticket. No drama, no costs, nothing. It was so easy. Unfortunately, I did get COVID and then I did have to postpone this trip, but they just gave me a voucher for the value of the cruise and I rebooked. I definitely think that the big cruise lines could learn a thing or two about customer service from Tallink. It was so unbelievably easy and I wasn't expecting it to go as well as it did, but I got there in the end. When I first saw the ship, I had no idea what she would be like inside. She was built in 1991, so she's older than most of the cruise ships that I normally go on. We walked straight into the ship and straight into this central promenade. This was actually the inspiration for some of the Royal Caribbean ships that we know and love, but I'll bring you a separate video about that. It's a very interesting story, but it's important to remember that back in the 1990s when this ship was built, this was never seen before. This was very, very exciting. It's still cool now, but for the 1990s, even cooler. This central street is lined with restaurants and bars and shops. The reception desk is here. Everything really is here. This is the central focus of the ship. I definitely thought that I might be bored on board. I couldn't imagine that a ferry would have very much entertainment, and I was also a bit worried that I may be hungry since this trip did not include any food. Looking at the prices of the food on the menu, I could tell that I wouldn't be doing a lot of eating out on this cruise, but for me this really wasn't the point of the cruise. I didn't go on this cruise for the food, although I did try quite a bit of food in the end. After a very quick look around the promenade, we headed to our cabin to drop off our bags. We decided to try and keep this trip as cheap as possible, so we didn't pay for any bags on our flights. If we both wanted to bring a suitcase both ways, it would have cost almost as much as the entire ferry trip, and because we had a day in Stockholm at the beginning and a day in Stockholm at the end, we didn't want to be carrying around big bags or suitcases. I bought this little bag for 3 days, and I had everything I needed. We got the Arlanda Express train from the airport into central Stockholm, and then later in the day we walked from central Stockholm to the cruise port. That took us around 45 minutes, but it was a lovely sunny day and we enjoyed it. It wouldn't have been much fun though if we did have big suitcases. They did actually sell socks in a can on this cruise, and socks that were shaped like cheese, all kinds of things that you didn't know that you needed. We ended up booking a Promenade Cabin, which worked out at €44 per person per night. I did originally book the cheaper €22 per person per night cabin, but when I got COVID and I rebooked it, I was feeling sorry for myself, so I decided to upgrade us to a window. I'm glad that I did do that because I spent a lot of time here in the window people watching, and we were right in the middle of the ship. It was a good location. The beds in the cabin were very comfortable, it was very clean, it was very functional, and I think you can definitely describe this as minimalistic. There wasn't any storage in this cabin in the traditional sense. There weren't any drawers, there weren't any cupboards, but there was an area where you could hang up clothes, and we put the rest of our stuff on these shelves that were kind of above the beds. There was a little table, a footrest, a TV, and amazingly, this cabin had 6 plug sockets. That's more than a lot of cruise ships have. It was around this point that I noticed that I only had one towel in the bathroom and there were two of us sharing this room. So we went down to the reception desk. They were very helpful there and we just requested, you know, can I have another towel? They said that they would bring that and another one did arrive later in the day. It turns out that my towel was within my bed folded down from the wall, and within that was my towel. I didn't think to look kind of under the pillow in my bed for my towel, but I suppose that does work. It was there all along. That was my mistake. The bathroom was fairly small, but it wasn't too different from the bathrooms I've had on cruise ships in the past. It reminded me of the bathroom that I had on the Costa Luminosa, which was very, very pink. There are lots of cabin types on board, from inside cabins that have bunk beds to massive suites. They also have cabins that describe themselves as being for allergic persons. I've never been on a cruise ship before where they have a cabin for people who are allergic to things, but they use different bedding there and different materials, and I'm sure if you're somebody who needs those cabins, they're really appreciated, so that's nice. They actually do have cabins on board where you can bring your pets too. You can't bring your dog into the bars or the lounges on board, but they have a doggy kind of exercise area on the top deck and also a place for them to go to the toilet. We were very lucky with the weather this day, so we decided to head up to the top deck and into the sunshine. I did joke that maybe it would be just like a normal cruise ship pool deck, but with cars parked everywhere, but thankfully it wasn't. There were cars on board this cruise, 450 cars, but they're down low on the car decks. We never saw the cars. The car deck is split into different areas and each one is labelled with an animal. I didn't know that at the start of the cruise, so I was a bit confused when I was looking at the deck plans and seeing, oh, the camels are down there, but I am assured that that is just a label so that you know where you have parked your car. It costs around €100 to take your car on this ferry trip, which I don't think is too bad. That's for one night, €100 per night. On the top deck, there are small seating areas on both sides with bars where you can buy a drink, and also you can see down into the promenade. This is where the glass roof is. I bought a Coke Zero, which cost me €3.50. I did think that I may have to ration my soda intake during this cruise because that could get very expensive very fast, but I did find a sneaky way later in the cruise to get my soda for much cheaper, much cheaper. There were lots of children on this cruise and quite a lot of adult parties, groups like stag do's. I think a lot of alcohol was consumed on this cruise. It's a very cheap way to do a weekend away if you are local, but we never found that anybody was intimidating. Nobody was ever embarrassingly drunk. Everyone was just having a good time and everybody was so unbelievably polite and friendly. I definitely think that the people from Sweden and the people from Finland may be the nicest people on the entire earth. There were a couple of exceptions, of course. A few people were a little bit annoying on our cruise, but generally speaking, I love those places. As we sailed away from Stockholm, we found a spot to stand on the promenade deck, and I started to wonder why we hadn't done any sort of muster drill. On a cruise, you have to do a safety drill called a muster drill immediately on departure or before you sail away. It is a requirement, it is a legal requirement by SOLAS, Safety of Life at Sea, and cruise ships get in big trouble if they miss the drill. They cannot miss the drill. It must be because our cruise was just too short to require a safety drill. Technically, we did 2 back-to-back cruises. You could just do the one-night cruise out to Helsinki, or you could just do the one-night cruise back, or you could do 2 cruises, or you could go back and forward for weeks if you wanted. You could spend a full fortnight on board if that's what you wanted to do. We decided to eat dinner in a place called Mundo, and this was right outside our cabin window. It was kind of like a fast food cafe. It was the cheapest place to eat on board, but a veggie burger and fries still did cost me €18. It's not cheap to eat on board. The vegetarian and vegan options on board were absolutely fantastic. Apparently it's around 10% of people in Sweden who do not eat meat, so it makes sense that they have vegetarian and vegan options for everything, and everything was very clearly marked, which was much appreciated. There was also a buffet on board where you could eat, which was probably the most popular choice on board. You could either pay for just one meal, or they do some sort of food packages. 2 breakfasts and 2 dinners cost €109 per person, or if you wanted to just pay for one dinner in the buffet, that would be €45. The buffet did include food and alcohol and non-alcoholic drinks. I wouldn't have got my money's worth out of the €45, I don't think, but I am sure that so many people go in there and they make their money back just in drink. I have heard that the food is very good. It's a very nice space on board, but for me, we just didn't do it during this cruise. For kids, it was around half price, I think. There were lots of other restaurants on board. There was an Italian restaurant, a steak restaurant, a seafood restaurant, and even a big pub where they would have live music quite often. They actually had a casino on board, and the casino was pretty big. I've been on cruise ships that have much smaller casinos than this ferry. It was so strange to be on board because so many areas definitely did feel like a normal cruise ship, but then certain areas felt more like a ferry. For example, this lounge, this could be on any cruise ship and it wouldn't look out of place. But I think some areas like this, they just look more like a ferry. I did joke that it was kind of like if you ordered a cruise ship from Wish. Technically everything is right, but it's kind of just a bit different. That is what it felt like when we did this first walk around the ship. Unlike on regular cruises, your cruise card isn't linked to any form of payment. When you go in a restaurant, when you go in a shop, you just pay the same way as you would on land, either with your card or with cash. On this first night, we had a drink in the Starlight Lounge and we watched a bubble show, and I don't know how else to describe it other than a bubble show, a show about bubbles. In the show, a man blew bubbles, very, very intricate bubbles, some of them with smoke in, and he actually put the audience members into bubbles too. It was the kind of entertainment that could be enjoyed by people regardless of language, because there were many languages spoken on board. It was very busy in this lounge. This is the biggest lounge on board, and there is a smaller area towards the front where you can see out to sea. To me, this lounge felt very much like being on a normal cruise ship. The stage actually rose up quite a bit for the productions, which was very cool. It gave everyone a better view. I did worry that we would feel as though we had to be constantly buying drinks in order to enjoy the entertainment, but it really didn't feel like that. There were 2 bars in this lounge and there were waiters wandering around asking people if they wanted drinks, but there were plenty of people watching the shows who didn't have drinks. It's not a problem if you want to just go and watch the show. The next day we docked in Helsinki around 10 AM and the time in Helsinki is 1 hour ahead of Stockholm, which did make things a little bit more confusing. When you were walking around the ship, if you saw the time on a clock, they would have 2 clocks there and it would have 2 different times. And when you looked in the entertainment schedule, it would have both the times on there. So no matter which clock you were on, you knew which time things were happening. The ship's crew would make announcements across the ship about things like the entertainment and about when we were docking in the morning. They would say things like, we are planning on docking in an hour, we're docking in half an hour, we are here, you can get off the ship. And this was broadcast everywhere. If you were in your cabin and you didn't know, have we docked yet, you would wait for the announcement and then you would know. The announcements were always made in multiple languages, but English was always one of them. All of the staff on board spoke English and spoke English very well, and you'd always find the menus and everything in English. If you do just speak English, not a problem at all. Tallink have an app, and although it is basic and it doesn't do very much, it works better than most cruise lines apps. You could see the entertainment schedule on the app and you could see when most things were open. The ship actually had free Wi-Fi, which is pretty cool. On most mainstream cruises, you do not get free Wi-Fi. It wasn't always the best Wi-Fi, but I'm used to that from cruising on cruise ships. It's not normally the most reliable, but at most points during this cruise, we were close enough to land to just use the 4G on our phones. But I thought it was nice. We had the option to use the Wi-Fi if we wanted to. There's an area on board called the Sunflower Oasis, and this is basically the ship's version of a spa. It's 3 big jacuzzis, a few seats, and you basically pay, I think it's for an hour and a half of time in this area. I didn't do that during this cruise, but it always seemed very, very popular. People were enjoying it, and you can also rent it out if you're a group and you want kind of a private jacuzzi party. You can do that too. Before our cruise, I didn't really know how our day in Helsinki would work. I knew that we were docking around 10 AM and that we would be there until around 4 or 5 PM, but I didn't know if we could kind of come and go during the day. The people who were boarding for the next cruise couldn't get on until I think 3 PM, but I hoped that because we were kind of cruise passengers for the entire day, it would be okay for us to come and go. Luckily, it did work like that, and all we had to do was scan our little QR code to get on and off the ship. There was no security to go through or anything like that, so you literally just walked on board. It was really nice. It was a very rainy day when we went to Helsinki, but we did have a nice walk around. I picked up some sweets from Lidl and a drink, and we picked up some more food to bring back onto the ship. I don't know if really you are allowed to bring food onto the ship, but nobody searches your bags. So unless you're walking on board actually eating a kebab or with a pizza, nobody's gonna stop you. If you want to bring some snacks, totally fine. When we did go back to the ship, because we had packed so light, I hadn't packed any other shoes, so I had to dry my shoes with a hairdryer, which works surprisingly well, so the hairdryer is pretty good. It was around now that we discovered the duty-free shops on board, and I'm used to cruise ships having little shops, but this shop was absolutely huge, and you could buy everything. You could buy alcohol, you could buy cigarettes, you could buy perfume, you could buy snacks, and most importantly for me, you could buy drinks. In the duty-free shop, I found out that you could buy 6 cans of Coke Coke Zero for €6.90, so just over €1 per can. They were the exact same cans that you could buy in Mundo, or you could buy in a vending machine for €3 or €3.50, the exact same cans, and we paid a third of the price just buying them in the shop and then just carrying them. Easy. I don't know how I've got this far in the video without mentioning Moomin, but Moomin is absolutely everywhere on this ship. Moomin is a cartoon character, and on board the Silja Symphony there are Moomin cabins, Moomin shops, and Moomin even came on board to give everybody hugs and high fives. Some of the Moomin cabins hold 3 passengers and some of them hold up to 6. You're usually paying for the cabin as a whole, so if you're taking a cruise on this ferry and you want to add on a child or 2, it's probably not going to cost much extra, if anything. It might not cost anything extra. Apparently the Moomins, which look like this, are a family of trolls. To me, that definitely looks like a hippo, but Moomins are trolls, who knew? There were quite a few children on our cruise, and there is a big kids club area with loads of things for them to do. The place where the kids hang out is called Silja Land, and they have ball pits, they have slides, they have all kinds of things there. They also have a huge conference centre, which I did not realise was so big until I looked at the deck plans. I am the only member of Emma Cruises, so I didn't decide to have a conference with myself, but I imagine this is a very cool place to have a business meeting. On the top of the ship there's a lounge called the New York Club, and it is the most amazing big space with these huge windows, and on our cruise it was only ever open from 9 PM in the evening, which I think is such a shame. I understand that the bar may not be open all the time, but I think at least leave this space open so that people could come and sit here. It's amazing views, you can see everybody walking around the top deck, and this would be a great place to, you know, pick up a can from the shop on board and just drink it here while you're reading a book. This area definitely felt like a cruise ship, but you could feel the vibrations more up here. You can see here that my drink is moving quite a lot. I was worried about feeling movement on this cruise more than a normal cruise ship, and I suppose in a way I did, but it wasn't really in the way I expected. I didn't feel seasick at all during this cruise, and it didn't feel as though the ship was moving side to side, but it did feel as though the ship was kind of vibrating more than most cruise ships. We didn't sleep amazingly well on this cruise because we would often hear people outside our cabin and people running up and down the corridor at night. Sometimes we would hear people laughing and they would bang on the doors as they went by, which was quite annoying, but then that is kind of to be expected. We took a weekend party cruise and people were having a good time. It didn't ruin anything for us, it just kind of stopped me from having a really good sleep. The New York Club area is where they have karaoke, and we went to karaoke one evening and I was amazed that everybody was fantastic at singing. I'm not just talking being able to hold a tune, but it was like everybody could professionally sing. It was amazing. We did have a group of guys on our cruise who I assume were on a stag do, because the main guy was dressed as Snow White and everybody else had a t-shirt with a photo of this man on it, and that tends to be a stag do thing. But even when they got up to sing at karaoke, they were absolutely fantastic. It was so much fun. Tallink may seem like a no-thrills way to cruise, but there was a cruise line that took this even further, and they offered cruises for $10 per night. It did not end well. Watch this video next to find out what went wrong with the world's cheapest cruise line and why I would give it a go if it did still exist.